In this video I will show you how to make a fun interactive Christmas card. You will see how to create a ho 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 background with die cuts. You will learn to make swinging doors colored with distress oxides and the way to shut them with a bar. And you will discover how to color some fun images with distress inks. You will also see how to place a funny chicken on the front and even have it peek out from behind the doors. You can choose to make the chicken with or without a Christmas hat. Both will look great. So let's get started! Hello, it's Cisvolk! Time to enjoy card making with me! As you have come to expect from me, I'm going to make another card using products from Vaessencreative, designed by Carla Creates. I want to use this wood pattern stamp and turn it into something interactive. And together with it, this fun chicken. I might also use the Christmas hat. The background I want to fill with die cuts. Probably I will use the larger ho 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 dies. But as a variation, you could also use numbers for when you make a birthday card, or maybe all these sentiments that are in this Christmas collection. Having dies in the background, as a background on its own, can make a nice pattern, you will see. But first I will be doing some stamping and coloring. I use Florence watercolor paper for stamping and coloring. Before I stamped that wooden panel, I used the anti-static pouch. However, it is not always needed on watercolor cardstock, and especially not when the paper is completely new out of the package. But you never know if it is safe to do heat embossing without preparing the paper, so you better do. I use VersaFine ink in the color sepia to ink the stamp. I ink it up very well. And because I don't use a stamping platform, I want to be sure it is covered well enough. I press firmly all over the stamp, so the image transfers well. That worked out very well. VersaFine ink always makes nice sharp and dark prints. Because I want to make wooden folding doors, I will stamp the wooden panel twice. VersaFine ink does take a while to dry, and because I really like the look of a glossy embossed image, I heat emboss the stamped lines with clear embossing powder from Reindeer. Because I want to be sure that the embossing powder adheres well to the ink, I let the powder fall from different sides. I apply a second layer and again let the powder fall from different angles. I catch the powder on a piece of vellum. Folded like a funnel, it guides the powder straight back into the small jar without getting stuck in the screw thread. I gently tap the vellum so all the powder slides down. This way nothing is wasted and everything stays neat. It is hard to see with clear embossing powder if there are unwanted grains sticking in unwanted spots. So I just blew over it to have only clear embossing powder sticking to the ink and not to the paper. I always like to watch embossing powder melt, so I keep that in the video for you to enjoy watching with me. When all the powder turns glossy, the heat embossing is done. Be careful not to overheat watercolor paper, it can ruin the effect. This will have to cool down before I add some color. That funny chicken that looks around the corner, I stamp with VersaFine Onyx Black ink. And I also heat emboss it with clear embossing powder from Reindeer. And the same goes for that funny little chick. Of course I sped this up and cut moments out. You know how it works. And if you want to know more, you will learn all about it in previous videos. You can always ask any questions you have in the comments. When I clean my stamps, I stamp them partially clean on a scrap piece of paper. And next I rub them clean with a damp microfiber cloth. As soon as possible I place them back on the acetate, so I don't lose them and they stay clean for next use. I color the wood panels with Vintage Photo Distress Oxide. Distress Oxide is an opaque, chalky ink, and I think that matte finish will look nice together with the glossy look of the embossing powder. I first color it diluted with water. Later I add a few layers for a nice covering. I don't color evenly, which means I color very messy. I want to have darker and lighter spots randomly. And it is no problem to color outside the lines, because we will cut it out anyway. When you cut just outside of the line and not on top. You want to keep that edge and have it visible. I will use this as a gate, and that gate has to open and close. Therefore, I also want to stamp and color the same pattern on the background of the paper. The size is exactly the same, so stamping on the back is possible. If you want to make it easier for yourself, just glue two pieces together. You will only have to make two of them. I choose to stamp manually. I can see through the clear block if I am stamping straight. If I shift a little bit, it is no problem, because we will not use the entire image. A small part will be hidden behind the card for the hinge mechanism. I press thoroughly everywhere so the pattern is stamped completely, also in the middle of the stamp. I also heat emboss the back and color the back with the same Distress Oxide ink. This time I used less water and I decide to add a third layer on the front, so there is more contrast. Notice that I do not add ink everywhere. I purposely leave some spots blank. Next thing to color is the chicken. For coloring I use Distress inks in the colors Lumberjack Plaid, Stormy Sky, Fossilized Amber and Black Soot. I keep a paper towel nearby and a water jar, and I color with a water brush. You can skip to the next card making part with the chapters, but otherwise enjoy watching me color! After coloring the images, I cut them out using precision scissors. The Christmas head I do not cut completely. I leave an extra space at the bottom so I can use it to slide it over the chicken's head. That way I can choose if I add it or not. For cutting the legs of that little chick, I have a tip for you. Start cutting the inside of the legs first and cut the easier parts, which are most likely the outsides, later. It is still a precise task, but it is best to cut the most delicate parts first when working with fragile pieces. The large chicken I purposely stamped a little out of the border of the paper, so there is some space left to place part of it behind the card panel. I keep that extra border to be able to fold it, but you could also just stamp on the edge and stick the chicken on the edge. In the head I will make a cut, so that I can slide the head of the chicken in that cut and have it wear its head or not. I like it a lot wearing this Christmas hat, but I can understand if you do not. And for a birthday card you do not need this hat, but since it is a Christmas card, I like this a lot. Having a card where you can play with the paper pieces is also nice. I add some Nouveau Aqua shimmer to the chickens and the head. It adds more to the Christmas feeling. If you do this, keep in mind that the brush picks up some pigment from the colored paper. So clean your brush in between colors, otherwise you will blur your image. If you have not cut very neatly, or even if you have but still see some white paper spots next to the stamped line, you can cover them up with a black marker. That way you will not notice it anymore and the stamped and cut out image looks finished. Now that the wooden gates have dried, I go over them with a damp paper towel. I use it to remove the chalky ink layer that sits on top of the glossy embossing. Now it is shiny again. I measure the middle of the paper and place the swing gate close to it. That way I can make a mark on the spot where I want to fold later. Now let's make the background panel with die cuts as I promised. I use some silver glitter paper from the Christmas release. Also I use some thicker textured paper. This paper is sold at the Do It Ink store. On the back I stick some double-sided adhesive from Vaessen. This comes in a roll, but you can also get sheets if you want larger coverage. Because I will die cut a lot with this paper, I add 2 strips of tape. On the glitter paper I add 1 strip. That is enough as I will cut fewer words in silver. Before die cutting, I cut around each die with scissors. That way the paper stays neat and clean. If I keep it as one big piece and run it through the machine too often, the paper will get indented and messy. Now I have a bunch of ho 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 ready to use for the background. At the moment, the backing of each adhesive letter is still on. I fill up a card panel with the ho 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 die cuts until the whole panel is covered. It is not a random pattern. If you look closely, you will see that the ho ho die cuts are neatly aligned in diagonal lines. Each vertical ho is placed about one letter lower and slightly to the left of the one above it. The same goes for the horizontal rows. Each ho-ho is placed one row down and also shifted about one letter to the left. This way the entire panel is evenly filled with the ho-ho text. I replace some white hoes with silver ones, but equally apart from each other. The letters that stick out of the panel I trim off neatly. And the ones I cut off I can use to fill up blank spaces. I thought it would be nice to have a red border around my ho-ho panel. That is why I first cut a little edge from the white panel before I start gluing. I do not want to waste the pretty red paper by hiding most of it behind the white panel. So I cut out a piece to reuse later. I could do this with a craft knife, but I prefer to use a nesting die from Creates. That way I get a nice straight piece I can use again for stamping the sentiment. I use a T-ruler to help me stick the letters straight. I hook the T of the ruler to the end of the work mat and tape it to my work surface to hold it in place. I also try to align the card with the work mat. For each letter that I stick on the paper, I remove the backing and place it down loosely. This way I can still adjust if it is skewed or too high or too low. For the top row, I start with the left and right letters. That way I can measure the distance and spread the letters evenly. If you use tweezers, you have a better view on how you stick down the words, and also you will keep the adhesive sticky. You can slide the vertical hoe under the ruler or just remove the ruler if you keep this hoe as the last one to glue down. When working on the next row, you will have to move the ruler one letter size down and also check if your card panel is still aligned with the work mat. While sticking the next rows, I realized that the letters cannot all be placed exactly horizontally or vertically. The vertical hoe and the horizontal hoe cannot always line up, because there are spaces between the words, but there are no spaces in the die cut. So that takes a little bit of creativity. If you stick to the diagonal lines where the vertical hoe is, you will not notice it. Now we have the card panel finished, cut a hole out of the red paper and have the chicken and gate colored, we can start assembling the card. I make a fold at the edge of the chicken, right where the stamped line ends. That is where I score a line. I fold this small strip to the back and add double-sided adhesive on both sides. Before sticking it down, I check the position of the chicken by holding one swing door underneath. I want the chicken to hang over that door. Then I fold the strip and stick it to the back of the panel. I also make a scoring fold on the swing gate. Remember the mark I made before? I now use that mark to make a score line. One panel is too long. The gate will not close neatly. So I decide to make a new score line close to it and fold it again. That fold will be on the back of the card panel, so you will not notice it. I will use the red paper, the same I used for cutting the background, to stamp a text that I can place behind the swing gate. There's a lot of choice. I decide to stamp "May your Christmas be filled with light and love." "I love you so much" I will stamp on top of the swing gate. That way it can serve as a kind of base for the little chick to stand on. On the other swing door I will stamp a snowflake. I stamped and heat embossed the text in white. But as I look at it, I am not fully satisfied. If I heat emboss the word Christmas in silver and the rest in white, or the other way around, the silver would stand out more. So I decide to do it all over again. I use the same paper, there's enough room to stamp another text. And while I am stamping, I make a mistake. And then I make another one. But I will show you how I correct these mistakes. Did you see what went wrong? At first, I should have only stamped the word Christmas and added silver powder. I corrected it by wiping away the powder from the top phrase. Then I assumed I had applied white embossing powder, but it turned out to be the clear version. So I had to remove the powder again from the top phrase. Then I had to add silver embossing powder again, because I had touched the letter H with the brush. And I had to make the top phrase free of powder again. Finally, I could add white embossing powder to the top phrase. And I was surprised that the Versamark ink still worked perfectly. I did not have to stamp it all over again. In the end, I stamped the last phrase and added white embossing powder on top. When I see there is not enough coverage of the white powder, I sprinkle a little more on top. It does not mix with the silver. It would have been better to emboss the word Christmas in silver first and then do the other phrases in white. But be careful not to overheat Christmas when it gets heated a second time. Would I not have messed up with the embossing powders, stamping and adding silver to only the word Christmas and next stamping the top and bottom phrase and add white embossing powder to that and at last heat emboss it in one go, is best for a nice result. I fan the paper to let the embossing powder cool down, so that I can trim the sentiment without smudging it. Now the embossing powder has cooled down, I remove the white talcum powder from the paper with a damp microfiber cloth. And here you see the two variations next to each other. The silver one is my go-to choice. I also trim the edges. So we have the card base, then the red border, on top the ho-ho card panel, with that funny chicken peeking around the corner, and a rectangle shaped red piece of paper, with white and silver embossed text. In front of the text I will place the wooden swing doors, but before sticking them down there is some stamping needed. I'm not sure if my text will stamp well in one go, so I use my stamping platform. That way I can stamp twice in the exact same spot, in case the first impression is not clear. I'm not sure if the embossing pouch is really necessary, but I want to be on the safe side with something that took a lot of effort to make. I stamped twice with Versamark ink and heat embossed the text with white embossing powder. I add the powder multiple times to have good coverage, since the ink is stamped on an embossed surface. But it looks very well. On the other wooden door I stamp and heat emboss a white snowflake. That door would have looked too bare without it. Now we can assemble everything together. The swinging doors will be placed between the white ho-ho panel and the red border. That little chicken can stand on top. In a moment I will make a wooden crossbar to keep the doors closed, but first I will stick the doors to the panel. I prefer to stick them with double-sided adhesive. I stick a strip on the inside of the small fold of the door. That way it sticks to the back of the white ho-ho panel. The same applies to the other door. Before attaching it, I check carefully that the doors fit together seamlessly. Because I made a double fold on this door, I can still slide it a little bit. Now I can add double-sided adhesive on the white panel and stick it onto the red border. The little chick I stick to the door with a foam block. I choose to have it stand on top of the text with its head sticking out above the door. The text can now be placed behind the doors. I choose a spot in the middle. The whole panel can be placed on the base card. You could also use a folded panel of red paper and stick the white panel on top of that. I am just being sparing with my red paper. The chicken can still move and the doors can open and close. I want the chicken to stay put, so I adhere it with one foam block on the head. If I want, I can adhere only the head and leave the head loose, so it can be removed. While I am playing with the doors, I see that the back of the chicken does not look nice all in white. So I decide to stamp the same head in the same place. I stick a piece of tape on a wooden door. This tape acts as a mask, so I cannot stamp on the door. I could also have used masking tape or simply placed a piece of paper there. It is not complicated to mask the rectangle door. I only ink the little chick's head. I do not need the body this time. And I stamp on the white head. It more or less fits, but it is mirrored. If stamping like this feels too difficult, you can also trace the outer line of the cutout image with a black fine liner and color the inside yellow. That way it looks exactly like the back side of the head. I used the fine liner to touch up the impression where it was not clear enough. That stamp that looks like a pole or a plank, I will stamp and use as a beam to close the doors. I stamp it the same way as I did with the doors. Sepia colored VersaFine ink and clear embossing powder. I cut it out and then stamp the back as well. Both sides I color with this dress oxide in the color Vintage Photo. When the ink is dry, I wipe off the glossy embossing with a microfiber cloth. This removes the chalky look from the distress oxide. In the left wooden swing door, I make a small cut with my blade, just a few millimeters wider than the width of the beam. I'm kind of doing this the rough way, but I just need the opening a bit bigger. Using scissors would have been safer. The beam I first slide through that cut. Then I open the door and put some adhesive on the other side of the beam. It would have been better to use double-sided tape. I applied too much glue and I was impatient for it to dry, so yes, tape for me the next time. I remove the excess glue, hold it for a moment and then it is stuck. I add some yellow ink for the little chick, some red ink for the beak and cheeks, and blue ink as a shadow for the eyes. The same colors as for the big chicken. The edge beside the head does not fit perfectly with the mirrored chick, but I do not mind. I color that edge yellow as well. And as I said, you can also just color it yellow without stamping the face on it, if you prefer that. Remember to add some white highlights in the pupils and on the cheeks. If this video showed up on your page, it means that you really like to make cards, or maybe you enjoy stamping, or the beautiful designs by Carla Creates. I would be very grateful if you liked this video or left a comment to let me know that it appeared on your page. Do not forget to follow me here on YouTube and click the bell to be notified when a new video is uploaded. You can also follow me on Facebook, Pinterest and Instagram for reels and card making inspiration. I would love it if you tag the cards you make inspired by my designs with the hashtag inspired by Cisvolk. That way I can see them and share them. Thank you so much for watching and I will see you next time. Bye bye!